Hello and welcome to Let's Improv a Story, where we have a quick and dirty podcast because I don't have a lot of time today, but let's knock out a podcast about something I mentioned recently, which was, I mentioned the idea of if you're one of these sort of, largest corporations that has an IP and, corporations live forever, and so you have an IP lasts a very, very, very long time. I guess Steamboat Willie is in the public domain now, but and some Sherlock Holmes, but not all Sherlock Holmes, and certainly not all Mickey Mouse. And as I try not to do a Mickey Mouse impression, don't do it. Anyway, I resisted. I'm so proud of myself. I mentioned if you have the toys, at least play with the toys. And as an example, I mentioned Star Wars, and something like, I think I just mentioned Star Wars. But one of my ideas, let's think about Star Wars toys. Not literally the toys, but also, yes, kind of the toys. If you were like, okay, we want to do Star Wars stuff, we own Star Wars, there's different avenues you can do, but one of them is like, hey, there's, especially from the original trilogy, a ton of awesome designs that did also become awesome toys or video games, la-di-da. So let's quickly let's have a brainstorm sesh of what are these sort of top tier kind of Star Wars toy things or like awesome designs, not like literal toys. Like when I say you have the toys, play with the toys, I do mean like if you have the cool design, fun thing, if you have Transformers, use the Transformers. If you have Ninja Turtles, they should do ninja stuff. Like do the thing, because no one else can do the thing legally. They can't. You'll sue them. So if you have Star Wars, you have certain designs that are awesome, like a Star Destroyer or an X-Wing or a lightsaber. There are, a TIE Fighter, the Millennium Falcon, just even, the Jedi are pretty cool. And, there's certain locations, but you don't really want to reuse locations. We're all looking at you, Tatooine. I could barely get the sentence out. Everyone's sick of Tatooine. So if you think of some of those ideas, like, obviously they have shows with Jedi in them and lightsabers, and it's a little more complicated. I guess you could have a show where like some alien kids discover a lightsaber, but like in theory you can't use a lightsaber unless you're a Jedi. Otherwise everyone would. You'd have people like just cutting their bread with lightsabers. The idea I think is that the lightsaber has a power cell in it that's heavy, and it's like kind of like a wild arced beam of plasma energy that's like outrageously dangerous, and so you kind of need to be using the Force not just to help you with strength and all that to move the thing, but also kind of to sort of tell where to move it and not injure yourself, and to actually successfully use it. We only see Han Solo use a lightsaber, the only sort of non-Jedi to do so, and he just kind of awkwardly slices and dices a tauntaun. Well, slices and dices isn't probably the right word. He awkwardly drags it across the belly of a tauntaun, and then he promptly shuts it down. So, other toys, like a Star Destroyer. I've had a sort of idea of like the idea of like, oh, it'd be cool to have a Star Destroyer show, and maybe this is just the sort of Star Trek fan in me, but like, it wouldn't be like a Star Trek show, but also if you had a Star Destroyer show, you would have the issue of like, you're following a bunch of bad guys. And this is Star Wars. It's a morality tale. It's a fairy tale of morality for the modern age, for, kids and all of us, to reinforce good versus evil. There is the Force. It is in balance when people are reasonable and sharing and selfless and kind. The Force is out of balance, i.e. the dark side, when people are selfish and self-focused and cruel and mean and hateful. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Evil, selfishy things that lead to harm and, throw the universe out of balance. And of course, it's just sort of a simple, this is the social contract of society. People share at a reasonable level, and, we all do better. Let's see. Yeah, anyway, someone was recently talking about, like, capitalism, not to get too nerdy, and the idea of a well-structured capitalist society is one where you are incentivized to create products that make everyone else better off. And then you, of course, are paid for that, and, that's the incentive, which is a cool idea. Anyway, moving on. I started a show, at this one I have sort of had like an idea or two, but not in depth. And also I don't want to do it. I'm leading towards why it shouldn't be done. As you are playing with the toys, you still have to do it in the Star Wars way. Again, the morality fairy tale and accessible for kids. A Star Destroyer show, if you just had focused on the bad guys, you're following bad guys, and that's bad, and you don't want kids, rooting for them. You could have a situation where you have like a rebel spy who's like, second in command, and during the Battle of Endor, the captain dies, and so now the rebel spy has been promoted to captain of this Star Destroyer in the wake of the Battle of Endor as sort of the Empire fractures. There's no way it collapses that fast, but as the Emperor dies with the second Star Destroyer, and the Empire fractures into warlords and Moffs and admirals and blah, 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 you would have this lone Star Destroyer now captained by a rebel spy who's a good person, trying to figure out what to do. They don't, and, can they come in out of the cold without their crew turning on them? Do they need to now go on adventures to sort of like get supplies and fight off pirates or even other Imperial warlords? And during that time, do they build a bond with the crew? And now they don't want to just like bring the crew in and have them all just like thrown into prison or something. Also, they should, because, the crew are just doing their jobs. They, 20 years ago would have been part of the Republic, blah, 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 blah. You can't just throw everyone from the Empire in jail. And there's an interesting moral dilemma going on there. I also had the idea that like maybe like an injured Mara Jade shows up. And I think Mara Jade is when she's in Heir to the Empire, the Timothy Zahn novel from the early 90s, which is the sort of first real look at anything post Return of the Jedi. I think she is she's former Emperor's hand, worked for the Emperor, secret sort of dark Jedi of his, but she, I think, is amnesiac-ish or whatever. I think she's not just hiding her past. I think it's slowly coming back to her. I don't know. Let's say it is. Even if it isn't, it doesn't matter exactly. But if it is, I mean, you could have a situation on the, if she shows up halfway through the series of this, 6 to 10 or whatever half-hour episode Star Wars TV show on the Star Destroyer, she could show up halfway through, be injured. She could even, it'd be interesting if she was actually losing her memories for some reason because of the trauma of being, disassociated or whatever from the Emperor. But it probably makes more sense if something happens to her at the end where she is presumed dead, but actually is in an event that would, an explosion or whatever that would make her lose her injuries. And then is discovered by Talon Card or whatever. Either way, it'd be an interesting show. And, as she sort of maybe susses out the captain and he tries to sort of fence her off, but and also the crew, but also bring the crew in safely in some way. And also, maybe not even get attacked by the, Rebel Alliance / New Republic. I think there's fun stuff to do there, but I don't think the tone is right for Star Wars. It's still, even with that, you could do that, and you could probably get through a show doing that, but that's a lot of it's like a thriller, basically. You'd have to have a situation where an entire Star Destroyer was co-opted by rebels or something, and trying to pretend to be part of the, that's impossible. Part of the fleet, it doesn't work. It's hard to find a way to play with a Star Destroyer. I guess the only way you could do it is if post-Endor, one gets grabbed by the Alliance and is then used to go on good missions as they try to, transition from the Rebel Alliance to the New Republic. So you could do it that way. It's sort of and they're, using TIE fighters and other stuff, but, for good, which is an interesting way to go about it. I think that would be cool if they even there's supposed to be a color for the Republic, which I think is the color on the Venator class Star Destroyers, the ones with sort of two heads and those notches on the sides from the Clone Wars, especially Revenge of the Sith. And certainly the Clone Wars show, the more aircraft carrier ones that open up in the middle to let all the fighters out, which I think is why they can land, because they're hollow. Either way, they are painted, and you'll note it's the open circle fleet, which is Anakin and Obi-Wan's fleet, with this sort of yellow sun, which is probably related to the Son of the Suns and the circular nature of the prequels and the original trilogy. And Lucas loves symbiont circles and the big affecting the small and how things go from one to the other. And the whole Son of the Sun, the idea that Anakin's the son of the Force, or the Force created him, Anyway, all that being said, there's a sort of a maroonish, red color on those Venators. That's sort of the color of the Republic, and it's taken off, and you see that at the end of Revenge of the Sith, where it's just a, white marble sort of Roman Empire Imperial Star Destroyer. And I think you could, if you painted a co-opted Star Destroyer post Return of the Jedi, as if it was a Venator, as if it was a, part of the Republic. I think that'd be a cool idea. Anyway, let's discard that. That's a toy you could play with, and I guess that is a way you could play with it. I don't know what you do exactly other than just go around and having good guy adventures. I mean, we could develop that, but I think that the toy you'd play with the most, you could say the Millennium Falcon is one, but they did the Solo movie, which, I guess made hundreds of millions of dollars and is a bomb of a movie. And even though, I will say the Millennium Falcon doesn't look like the Millennium Falcon, and maybe that's to sell different toys, sort of like how they changed the, the sensor dish or whatever on the top. Though, I mean, it also broke off in Return of the Jedi, so, I do think that, but, if you were going to use the Millennium Falcon, you want it to look like the Millennium Falcon, of course. Either way, I will say that the toy, I think that's the most accessible for the idea of, if you have the toys, play with the toys, is X-Wings. And I probably brought this up when I brought this up earlier, but like the idea of an X-Wing, and then there's the idea that they're going to do like a Patty Jenkins directed Star Wars X-Wing movie, but that was on, and it was off, and now maybe it's on again. But you could even do the movie and then do a spin-off TV show. Might be a good way to sort of bring, attention to Disney Plus or whatever. If you're not just like bringing the movie to Disney Plus after theaters and making money on it in theaters, but then like the movie hits theaters and movie hits Disney Plus at the same time you announce like the release date of the show. Whatever. Either way, if you're going to provide Star Wars TV content to Disney Plus, I think an X-Wing show is a especially budget-friendly way to do it, and it is an absolute, and especially a place where if the broad audiences are going to go to theatrical exhibitions, movies, then you're going to have a more narrow, willing to pay subscriber audience for your Disney Plus show. So you kind of want like a more nerdier show, or if you have the toys, play with the toys. It's not a giant epic kind of a content or story to deal with. Therefore, let's make an X-Wing show, which again, budget-wise, you're just making cockpits, you're making like a base or whatever. You're, and then the CGI is you make a model. It's not like a creature model. It's not interacting with terrain or other environments or stuff like that. It's just like a kind of metallic X-Wing, and there are TIE fighters and A-Wings and B-Wings and Y-Wings and TIE interceptors and on and on and on, and shuttles and stuff, and the capital ships that support them. But generally, it's just those. You make the models, and they don't do much. Maybe some wings move, and they fly around in space. And there's not much to make once you make the starfield for space. And I would argue against, as I think is sort of the George Lucas way of showing space in Star Wars, not to put a lot of stuff in space. Space is empty. There's really nothing there. I feel like a lot of space shows these days, you're just like, everyone's always in like a nebula, or there's something going on. There's a bunch of colorful asteroids. And it's like, no, that's not space. That's not remotely space. Space is a starfield. It's a big, empty place. Yes, if you go to a thing, you'll find like a thing, a nebula, etc., that is out there in space. It's still an object that's all alone out there. So anyway, an X-Wing show. You're obviously playing with the toys. You've got all those cool like fighter, space fighters to play with. You then are building out like, I guess you want to. There are things you probably want to avoid in a way. I mean, you could certainly say like Top Gun in space. That's the easy thing to say. That's compelling from a sort of pitch point of view. But, first thing is like the sort of, the reboot of Battlestar Galactica has a lot of like space fighters, fighter jock kind of like, fighter pilot storylines and perspectives and point of views and stuff like that. But of course that's like a darker show, like specifically so. You have people coming over from doing like Star Trek for a while, and they want to do like sort of like people are mean to each other, or they're flawed characters, not just mean, of course. But you also want to avoid the Top Gun Maverick thing. Is something you can. First of all, Top Gun is built around like fighter school, so it's not just like air combat all the time. And the training part allows it to be competition between I think mostly just American pilots competing against each other, basically like a sport. I mean, it's almost less like Top Gun and more like NASCAR or something, or less fighter pilots combat training and more just like, hey, it's people and machines competing. And then they do something at the end that actually is, air-to-air combat associated with an enemy. this would be, I think, I mean, you want to go on missions. You know, they can have training and all that, but you want to go on missions. That's the fun of it. I mean, if you think of like playing with the toy, it's, you know, X-Wings versus TIE fighters and all that stuff. And really building out the show is just building out, you know, again, you probably don't have a lot of alien characters because Star Wars doesn't tend to actually focus much on the alien characters. They're they're off to the side. They're part of the flavor of it. They're part of the fantasy of it in many ways, like the space fantasy. As you know, there's this sort of mythological good versus evil construction to the whole thing, and all the stuff. The fact that you've got fighter jets in space, or you've got, you know, I mean, you know, planes are space fighters, and cars are speeders, and you know, naval ships are these Star Destroyers, and et cetera, et cetera. They're all, you know, they're analogous to the real world, but different enough to not seem like it. And of course, you've got, you know, knights or samurai and cowboys, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's all there. The evil sorcerer of the emperor, and, you know, an actual princess, all that stuff. You know, Jabba's like a mafioso. I mean, it's a amalgam of all different kinds of, you know, film and pulp genre. Just fun things all put together, and it's part of, but it's all put together pretty seamlessly, which is why it's so joyous and different enough from our reality or how we normally see them in movies and other depictions. Either way, your X-Wing show is, you're going to want to have fun with the thing, and how you do that with characters. I mean, if you look at Star Wars movies, they're very plot focused. And they're very set piece focused, and you just go do the thing. And honestly, something I believe for a long time is if you are going to figure out what to do with Star Wars, you should look to the Clone Wars, because that's overseen by George Lucas. And they kind of said, like, hey, we're basically trying to make basically a Star Wars movie every week, but in the span of like 20 minutes, half an hour, or whatever. And eventually they start going to 2 and to even 4-part episodes, which is easier as they build out their assets and all that stuff. And it's also, you know, it makes them more cinematic as well as they stretch out over those. But they're still episodic, though. I mean, even movies have acts, and that can all make sense. But I think if you look at that show, and there's so much of it, because you look at just like the original Star Wars trilogy or even the prequels, there's such a weird, like, sort of like, how do you pierce the veil of figuring out what Star Wars is and how it gets made? It's so idiosyncratic. And it's hard to figure out how all this stuff gets in here with the right tone and the right amount of balance and the right levels of things. But when you look at the Clone Wars show, there's enough of it to get a feel for what it kind of is. And it's very much like an adventure serial, like George Lucas talks about Star Wars being inspired by, and a serialized adventure story, an adventure of the week. And it is very, very, very plot focused. Like, there's a thing, and it's on the other side of a giant wall, and like, we're gonna figure this out, and us and our troops are gonna figure out, can we scale it? We can't scale it. We can go under it, can't go under it, can't go around it, it's too long. Like, we'll figure out a way. Is there a weak point in the wall? Is there a crack in the wall? Oh, is there a monster that has burrowed into the wall, and we can brave, you know, the monster, or even befriend it, or avoid it, or trick it, and then get to the other side of the wall because it dug a hole through it. You know, something like that would pretty much be an episode of the Clone Wars. And then you would have, you know, in the Clone Wars, Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Rex, etc., and they may or may not kind of like learn a bit of a lesson or something, or at least exhibit some facet of their character in overcoming the obstacle. But that is not the focus of it. There's a lot of spectacle and just sort of the beauty of things operating in this science fantasy fairy tale world of Star Wars, and just watching these incredible designs. Again, Star Wars is so reliant on extraordinary design work, and then of course the music, because if you're just doing a very plot focused thing, you need to be swept away by the raw artistry of it, of the beauty of the cinematography, of the incredible designs that you are filming, accompanied by great sound effects, which are so compelling and distinctive and just fun to hear, and tremendous music, which is propulsive and catchy and, you know, just wondrous. And that propels Star Wars much of the time because it's so archetypal, it's so mythological. It's really a very, you know, you wouldn't want to say simple, but it's a very clear narrative much of the time. So there's no reason to not do that with this. You know, keep it simple, silly. But like, just do the thing. Get some different archetypal characters. I mean, you can base them off of the characters you've seen in Star Wars. There can be the young Luke-like person of whatever gender, and the sort of older brother, cocky Han Solo type. Though he does say don't get cocky, but he also is. I think that's projection. There can be the ardent idealist, like Leia-like character. There would be the kind of like. Do we trust them? Lando character, et cetera, et cetera. There can be someone who falls from grace, like an Anakin character. You can do all these archetypes. There can be the sort of, rule following, but still kind of witty and tactically ingenious Obi-Wan character and all that. But he's also sort of an honorable gentleman type, or he or she or whatever. You can have all these character types and put them together and just have a fun time. And it's hard to argue against doing anything deeper than that. I mean, what's the point of an X-Wing show? Obviously, again, if you're going to play with the toys, play with the toys. And certainly you want to find something with deeper meaning. But I would maybe almost let that come to you as the show goes along, as you develop these characters and develop what they're doing. And I mean, what they're doing should be pretty simple. They should be fighting the Empire and space pirates, and, they're do-gooders fighting do-badders. And then as the characters grow and change and live and die, you can start to find, I mean, there's certainly in the wake of, you can certainly find themes on a larger sense in the wake of the power vacuum following the Empire's fall. So you're certainly going to deal with things there. And The Mandalorian deals with this like a little bit. And there's interesting stuff there about, you are getting into sort of trickier elements, but the Clone Wars show as well, and shows are expected to do a little more micro on these things as well. The Clone Wars show, again, which is, I think, your general inspiration for these things. And again, the Clone Wars show is fun and action-packed and propulsive, and the characters are generally pretty big, and, they're witty and fun and dramatic, and let's just define what this thing is that we are using as inspiration or as a guidepost. But the TV show, so you can go in deeper onto other issues, and the how people deal with a power vacuum and what happens in that situation post-war is often very rough. Though, I mean, it's a big galaxy. You don't have to deal with just like the worst situations. If you want to maintain the tone of these things and make it accessible for kids, you just want to as far as that purpose of Star Wars, you want to make it accessible both in level of detail or clarity of storytelling or simplicity of storytelling, and also just the general tone so that kids can, enjoy it. Otherwise, you're sort of missing the purpose. This is maybe, have I said my Andor thing? Probably not. I'm trying to be nice about the stuff, but like Andor seems like a good show that would be a good like Blade Runner show. Like tone-wise, it seems way off of Star Wars. I probably have said this. Either way, like it's a joke of like 6-year-olds watching Andor. But the thing, if 6-year-olds can't watch it, then it's not Star Wars. There's a reason there are generally characters in Star Wars, at least in the beginnings of them, that are accessible to younger audiences. Whether it's the Clone Wars and it's a straight up animated cartoon, or it's the droids in A New Hope, or Jar Jar and Anakin in The Phantom Menace. Like there's a way in for kids, at least in the first one. And that's very important because that's Lucas's purpose. Anyway, so for the show, you can deal with those things if you keep the tone right. Now, again, like what you build out in the show, where it goes, just have fun with it. Have them, there are lots of, you think of Top Gun actually, and, the latest one, Top Gun Maverick, there was a sort of there was like a bombing run. They did to climb up like they had to like go through a canyon and then dodge fighters and bomb a thing and then climb to a high altitude over a short distance to get over a cliff and get away. Like you can certainly be inspired by those kinds of just what you've seen in movies before. The whole Lucas being inspired by what the Dam Busters, or at least using footage from it when crafting the Death Star trench run in the original. There's all kinds of stuff you could do with it, but I think maybe I'm struggling right now because it's just play with the toys. Now, again, if you're building out the show, you do need these characters, but it's hard not just to almost go back to what Lucas's apparently original, like, immediate, minute, primal spark for Star Wars was like 2 spaceships moving through space, like shooting at each other, which is what, of course, how Star Wars starts. Which he said he'd never seen before, and it hadn't been seen before. Star Trek, the TV show, the spaceships would be stationary, usually in different shots, not moving, so they would fire at each other. There are spaceships moving in 2001: A Space Odyssey, but nobody shoots at anyone, and so. It's really Star Wars before you really get that. And, they had to invent it. They had to invent a kind of camera and the ability to do it, and the sort of optical film printing process with blue screens and all of that to do it. It literally hadn't been invented yet, and they invented it, which is pretty amazing. So, yeah, what to do with the show, what you put in it. I would get away from... there's a big push you hear about, like, get away from the Jedi or get away from the Skywalkers and all that stuff. And, sure. The thing with the Skywalkers is there's not much... The story is sort of told, so that there's that issue. And as far as the Jedi, they're not probably going to be... Well, first, they don't exist really post Return of the Jedi, and secondly, you could certainly have Luke Skywalker and his X-wing show up, which would completely invalidate those two ideas. And that's you could and you couldn't, because you're doing like an AI Luke Skywalker, and there's all that stuff. That time may have just literally passed. If this were like an animated show, that'd be different. And there's nothing wrong with checking in on famous characters. Again, if you're going to play with the toys, the least you can do is play with the toys. So, you may as well, you could go have fun here and there. It is there to have fun with. But for the most part, you're not going to do that. And Jedi and X-Wings, going on patrol or doing missions doesn't make much sense. And they don't really exist post Return of the Jedi. So you're looking at doing something where, and again, you don't have to do it post Return of the Jedi. You could even do hum. You could even do this as a sort of anthology, not an anthology series, or like a real anthology series where, X-Wings are meant to go to the Empire, I believe, canonically, or expanded universe canonically, and the war breaks out, and they end up, I don't know, maybe they're too expensive or something like that, and so the backers of the Rebel Alliance buy, the small amount of them, because they don't have, many, I guess, pilots and stuff to begin with. May as well get, these ships that are very, what do you want to call it? Like multi-purpose ships, the X-Wings, they have hyperdrives. I don't think TIE fighters do, etc. Better shields, all that stuff. I guess they have 4 lasers and not 2, etc. So you could do each episode. And one of the weird things about the Clone Wars, which is very fascinating, is that the first 2 seasons are non-chronological. They are loosely so, but they are non-chronological. And if you want to, you can Google, they even put it on StarWars.com at one point. You can Google Clone Wars in chronological order, and you will be jumping all around. I think like a season 3 episode is like the first episode you should watch, and then like another one, and then the movie, and then you're bouncing between seasons 1 and 2 and dipping into season 3. And it's not like until maybe season 4 or at least season 3 when it's like pretty much a straight shot, but even then not completely, which is fascinating. And it adds a certain, it makes a show that, again, when you talk about like simple, clear kind of plots and stuff like that, more interesting. And I think that's not the worst idea here. Is you could take an X-Wing show or an X-Wing based show and have each episode or every other episode take place in a different time period. You could have you could have one that's just straight up post the Battle of Yavin at the end of New Hope. You could have one that's in the wake of the flight from Hoth, in the beginning of the don't say it, of The Empire Strikes Back, and again you could have one that's in the run up to the as you're collecting the fleet in the run up to Return of the Jedi. You could have one where they originally steal or whatever, or co-opt or get the original X-Wings into the Rebel Alliance's possession. You could bounce around through time, and that could actually, in like 1 to 3 episode kind of arcs. And that could also allow you to play around with it enough to find out where you kind of want to play with or who you want to play with. Because again, certain characters, there could be the same one singular character who ages somewhat and grows somewhat. Again, like kind of Luke or, Luke, Han, and Leia and Lando all, change. But you could have one central character that's at different points of their life. And of course, you can do the trick if they reference a thing that hasn't happened yet, or, and then you jump back and maybe you see it, maybe you don't. And you can have fun with that, of course. You got to keep track of it. You better write it down. But yeah, that would be, I think, a fun added layer of complexity to this, is that, like, here's a mission from this time period, and let's jump back over here, and let's jump way ahead of the first one. And then, that would be an interesting way to go about it. And that way you could bring in a greater variety of writers and, sort of like original series Star Trek it, and some early Next Gen too, where you can just bring in really talented writers and be like, hey, Star Wars, X-Wings or whatever, probably. Just give us your X-Wing story, and we'll just, adapt it to whatever things we have in the show, which aren't many. Generally just plop it in somewhere, and we'll run with it and have fun with it. And I think that's maybe the best way to go. It's like, I know there was the Tales of the Jedi, now there's going to be like a Tales of the Empire. There was only 2 stories, but the Tales of the Jedi one had... it kind of followed Ahsoka for 3 stories at different time periods, and followed Dooku at 3 different time periods, but they were different time periods. Either way, it's sort of like that, and you could do a Tales of the X-Wing pilots, I guess, and just they could all be short stories. But I think there's enough to sort of sustain a series. But yeah, this is the part of the episode where I say, but yeah, we're past half an hour, and a little out of ideas for this thing at this point. I mean, other than coming with specific things and getting down to the nitty-gritty of actual plots of actual episodes, or, arcs from episode to episode. But it'll be fun. Just you can bring in people. I think you've got a sort of system there where you can, bring in people, and you've got a show and the tone of the show and what you want from the show, and I think a affordably budgetable show that won't break the bank, as all these streaming services try to cut costs and be profitable. And I think it'd be fun. I would certainly like to watch it, like to see it. And whenever the movie does or doesn't happen, and I will be happy to see or not see it if it does or does not exist. That'd be cool too. I guess it wouldn't be called X-Wing, it'd be called Rogue Squadron. But either way, I would look forward to it. And yeah, you all have a great time. I'm online as Throwaway Lines. You all have a great week, and I'll see you next time.